So let's talk about the case of Wukong. On April 15th, 2025, the celebrity cat passed away, and it kicked off this huge nationwide controversy. His owner claimed it was murder, but the scientific evidence, well, it tells a very different story. Today, we're going to follow that evidence and see what really happened. And right out of the gate, this was the claim from Wukong's owner, Zhao Shu, an explosive accusation that immediately set the stage for a viral mystery that honestly captured everyone's imagination. And man, did it spread. This idea of a deliberate malicious poisoning, it just created this absolute firestorm online, with millions of people demanding justice for Wukong. But, beneath all that emotion and all the speculation, there's a trail of actual verifiable clues. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to set aside the viral narrative for a minute and just follow that trail, see where the science actually takes us. Okay, so let's dive right into the investigation itself. To really crack a mystery like this, you have to start by asking the right questions, the same core questions any real detective would focus on. And there are really three core questions we need to answer. First, when did Wukong die? We've got to lock down that timeline. Second, how did he die? And third, why can we be so certain it wasn't poison? These three things, they're the foundation for everything else. Okay, first things first, the timeline. Just like in any CSI-style investigation, nailing down the exact time of death is absolutely critical. And you know where our first big clue comes from? The owner's own data. Wukong's GPS tracker went completely dark for a full 20 minutes, from 4:10 to 4:30 p.m. Now that is not just some random glitch, it's a massive piece of the puzzle. So what could cause that? Well, the answer is actually a basic principle from physics class, the Faraday Cage effect. You've probably experienced this yourself, right? Your phone signal dies the second you step into an elevator? Same idea. A metal box blocks the signal. Okay, so why is this so important? Well, think about it. The inside of a car, with all its glass windows, that is not a Faraday cage. Your GPS works just fine in the passenger seat. But the area underneath a car, with the solid metal chassis and the engine block, that is a perfect Faraday cage. So the only way that signal disappears is if Wukong was trapped underneath the car. All right, our second big clue is the state of the body itself. When Wukong was found at 7:03 p.m., he was described as very stiff. Now, this was just 2.5 hours after our estimated time of death, which, well, that seems way too fast for rigor mortis to set in. But there's a really good scientific reason for that. And this is the key. Heat speeds up the process, like a lot. On that day, the asphalt was blistering hot, over 50 degrees Celsius, and under a hot car engine, it could easily be over 60. In that kind of oven-like environment, getting full stiffness in just a couple of hours isn't just possible, it's exactly what you'd expect to happen. And the final piece for our timeline puzzle? The state of decomposition. Yeah, there were flies and some fluid, but there is no strong smell, none of those telltale green spots you get with advanced decay. In that kind of heat, this all points to a body that's only been there for about 2 to 3 hours. It locks in that 4:30 p.m. time of death perfectly. So now that we've locked down the time of death, we can start to piece together what actually happened in Wukong's final moments using the physical evidence from the scene. And this is where things get really interesting. When you put the claims next to the scientific reality, a totally different story starts to emerge. The owner saw worn claws and thought, struggle with a person. But the science says severely worn claws point to desperately clawing at hard metal. A popped harness buckle? The owner saw an attacker, but that's a classic sign of a buckle failing under extreme physical strain. And that dark fluid? Not a sign of poison, but a well-documented result of heat stroke and suffocation. So, you see, the owner's whole argument was based on this false choice. The thinking was, hey, there are no broken bones, so it can't be a car accident. Therefore, it must be poison. But that totally ignores the most likely scenario, doesn't it? A fatal car accident doesn't have to mean being crushed. It can mean being trapped. All right, let's just tackle the poisoning theory head on. We're going to see if it holds up to just a little bit of logic and some simple math. I mean, just think about what would have had to happen for the poisoning story to be true. In just 3 minutes, an attacker would have to instantly catch a super skittish cat in a wide open area, do it completely silently, give it a poison that works in under 20 minutes, and then, for some reason, use a complicated signal jammer instead of just, taking the GPS collar off. And all this in a public place during the busiest time of day, it really starts to sound unbelievable. But here's the thing, we don't have to just guess if it's unlikely. We can actually calculate the statistical probability of this perfect murder scenario ever playing out. And when you run those numbers, the odds of the poisoning theory being true are less than 1 in 2.6 billion. That's not just unlikely, it's statistically almost impossible. To give you some perspective on just how astronomical that number is, you are more than 100 times more likely to win the grand prize in the national lottery than for the poisoning story to be true. Let that sink in. So, if it wasn't some kind of criminal mastermind, then what was the real cause? Well, all the evidence points to something far more common, far more predictable, and ultimately, far more tragic. And the final key to understanding this whole thing comes from Wukong's own GPS data from the night before he died. He spent over 5 hours in that exact same parking lot, marking it as his territory, his safe zone. So what happens the next day when he's abandoned and terrified? His instinct just kicks in. He runs straight back to the one place he feels safe, that same parking lot. Look, figuring out what happened to this one cat is important, for sure. But it also reveals a much bigger, more sobering story about risk, about responsibility, and about how we decide what's true. The tragic reality is that a free-roaming cat's life is just incredibly dangerous. The average indoor cat lives 12 to 18 years. An outdoor cat? Just 2 to 5. Wukong only lived for 8 months. His fate wasn't some 1 in a billion anomaly. It was a predictable, heartbreaking outcome of the dangers that so many animals like him face every single day. And so ultimately, this whole case leaves us with a really critical question for our times. In this age of information overload, what do we trust? Do we trust the compelling, emotional, viral story? Or do we trust the verifiable scientific evidence? Because sometimes the real truth isn't in the story that feels right, but in the cold, hard facts that the science reveals.